welcome to another video from Flash Jazz Cat. Now this is a 1200XL that you might recognise from a previous video. It was actually the short 1200XL video, and the owner had fitted Ultimate 1MB and had managed to short out the halt signal that goes to the Ultimate 1MB, and he'd managed to short it out to an adjacent trace. I thought that was the only problem with the board. Silly me. Now before we go any further, a word about our sponsor PCBWay. PCBWay have been a partner of this channel for a year now already. That's incredible. Where does the time go? And I must say it's been very pleasurable. Now not only do PCBWay offer their experience in PCB prototyping and manufacture, but also in CNC machining, 3D printing, and they'll even make you a flexible PCB. They have an excellent online quote system, and their technical support is absolutely second to none, and this is testified by a couple of my customers having used PCBWay before. So if you're in need of PCB prototyping or manufacture, pop down to PCBWay.com today. I forgot to actually try it with a cartridge. It appears that I forgot to try it with a cartridge before I sent it off. So I fixed that problem, installed the Ultimate 1MB properly. I shouldn't have assumed, of course, that would be the only problem on the board, because it had been worked on before, and boards that have been worked on by other people, in my experience, are a real Pandora's box of problems. So we discussed the problem. The owner was really nice about it, of course, and he was going to send another board in, an XEGS motherboard anyway, because it's coming all the way from America. So all he did was he stuck the board back in the box, because we couldn't resolve the cartridge problem over email, and I said I'd have a look at it again, so that's what I'm going to do now. So first, I think we'll verify the existence of the problem. So I'll pop a cartridge in the side, we'll turn the machine on and see what happens. So we should go straight into the action language cartridge here. Just position the TV properly, and we go straight to the self-test. So there is a problem straight away. So it's not recognising the cartridge, and he said that the owner said that when he had the Spartados X, the onboard Spartados X enabled, so when that's on, you should boot to Spartados X, and then when you type car, it should run the external cartridge. And the screen was flickering a bit, and it seemed to attempt to run the cartridge, so it knows there's a cartridge there, but it couldn't run it. So it's either it's not finding the cartridge signature at the top of the ROM space, or something, I don't know yet. So let's unplug the machine and have a closer look. So what I asked the owner to check was basically the continuity on the RD4 and RD5 lines. Now I think the RD5 cartridge sense line goes all the way to GTIA. Well, we plug a cartridge in. What I want to see is if RD5, I'm a bit foggy about how this actually works, to be quite honest. So if we turn it on without a cartridge present first, and we'll have a look at MMU pin 8. Right, so the computer's turned on, it's got no cartridge in, and if we look at MMU pin 8, oh come on, bloody multimeter. I think I need a new multimeter now. I've just bought a new handset for the desoldering gun, because the other one was worn out. Now I think I need a new meter. So we've got 0.5 volts with no cartridge plugged in on pin 8. So I'm going to turn this off, I'm going to plug the cartridge in again. Turn it back on again, and then we'll see what we get. MMU pin 8, and we get 3.3 volts. So that looks like it works, and if we measure, I think it's pin 9, if we do a continuity test on pin 9 of GTIA, we'll just beep that out. So we'll go from pin 8 of the MMU, and we'll go to pin 9 of the GTIA chip, and that's got connection. And right, so let's see. Well, we know that it's got that signal's got connectivity to the cartridge port, because the signal changes when the cartridge is plugged in. But I had a chat with Candlo Sin anyway, and I'm probably oversimplifying how these signals actually work. Although the cartridge sense line RD5 that should be persistent. So I think I'm measuring that correctly, and that seems to work. So that would explain why the system thinks that there's a cartridge attached at least, but for some reason we can't actually run the thing. So let's have another look. Let's unplug the system. I want to have a look under this OS-ROM socket now. The owner said he's tried a completely different Ultimate 1 megabyte in this board and different cables, and the result was identical. So we can discount the cables, which I made. These are custom length cables. So the cables aren't the problem. I'll take this off so it's out of the way. So what else could be the problem? Right, so if you have a close look at this socket here, and you'll see some flux actually, because the first thing I did before I clicked the camera on, to be quite honest with you, is soldering underneath this socket, which the owner replaced. You could have actually just left this one here. If your soldering isn't, if it's not your forte, put it that way, you could just leave the other socket here. Some of these boards have shorter sockets in them, and you've got no choice but to replace them. Because for those of you, give a bit of background information. The prerequisites for installing the Ultimate 1 megabyte into a 1200XL are that it has a single chip OS-ROM configuration. Now the 1200XL out of the factory had two OS-ROMs. It had an upper ROM and a lower ROM, and they were 24 pin. Now some of the boards had the longer socket installed, and actually some of the 1200XL came with a full length EEPROM high and low OS-ROM, with obviously with a sticker on the front. But a lot of them came with a masked ROM. The masked ROM is a 24 pin chip as opposed to a 28 pin chip. So in many cases they've got the shorter socket with the two pins on either side unused. So what you have to do in that case, if you've got the shorter socket, you've got no choice but to replace the socket with the longer one. Some people just bodge an extra couple of pins on the end here. It looks a bit janky. But the owner in this case anyways decided to replace the front OS-ROM socket. This one's going to become redundant owing to the way that he's got the jumpers here. You can actually use either of these sockets for the Ultimate 1 megabyte OS-ROM ribbon cable. Sometimes it's expedient to use the rear one because maybe you've got a dual pokey board or something here. I think I had a machine, a 1200XL, that had a lot of stuff in front of this front socket, so I think I used the rear one. It's a bit of a tight squeeze with the ribbon cable coming out of the back, but it can be done. So this person's decided to use the front OS-ROM socket anyway. I'm very foggy about these jumper connections, to be quite honest. I couldn't possibly tell you what they do offhand, but they are there to basically provide support for EEPROMs of various sizes. So I reflowed these pins because they looked a bit janky on the other side of the board, and I thought it probably couldn't harm to just reflow them, but that didn't make any difference at all. So that's what the flux is on the board that you can see here. I just reworked it a bit, but it's done nothing. So if we have a look at the 1200XL schematic, which I'll flash up on the screen as I'm talking here, the two OS-ROM sockets should share almost all of the address and data line signals between them, even though this one isn't used. So you'll have all the address and data lines running to this, probably to this socket laterally across here. I could flip the board over and have a look, but I'm going to take a best guess that that's the way it works. And we know that the signals are getting from here to the Ultimate 1 megabyte, so the connections between here and here are all good. But what might be useful is to know whether the connections from this OS-ROM socket and that OS-ROM socket to the cartridge connector are good as well. And since it looks like there's been a bit of a fight getting this the old socket off the board here, or maybe getting the new one on, I'm thinking it would be useful to actually just do a continuity test between the upper and the lower OS-ROM socket. Obviously there'll be a few chip select and such like output enable which aren't shared between the two sockets, but I had a look at the schematic earlier on, and most of this front edge is all address and data lines, so I'm just going to ping them out. So that one's fine, that one's fine, that one's fine. And of course, as well as doing this, we need to check for shorts as well between the adjacent pins if we don't find a problem here. So that's fine, that's fine, Nothing on that one. That one's fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Fine. Nothing on that one. Nothing on that one. Right, so all but 3 pins have continuity. So let's have a look at the schematic. So if we look at the 2 OS-ROM chips here, we can quickly see that almost all of the signals are shared between the 2 chips. There's only one, which is chip select, and that goes to the OS high and OS low pins on the MMU. Now this was the original 1200XL MMU, which is no longer present in the machine. I asked the question hypothetically kind of in the previous video about this board, what the difference was between the 1200XL and the XLXE MMU, and one thing I did completely miss at the time was these 2 signals. I suppose there'll be a single chip select on the XLXE MMU, so the MMU must manage on the original 1200XL configuration. Obviously it must direct bus data to and from, or from, one or the other of the ROMs. So that's not happening anymore, and we know that chip select works, and it may not actually even be an issue now, so we can probably ignore pin 20. Yeah, so that they're not connected, so we expect that. Now the other 2, we had this one here, which is pin 13. So pin 13, if we look at the schematic, is D3. Now they should definitely be connected together. D3 should definitely be present on both of these pins. So I think we may have, well, we found the first problem. I can probably, let's just see if D3 appears anywhere on the cartridge connector. So the pin we were looking at was this one here. So if we just drag along here, one of these pins, I can't even be bothered to figure out which one it is, but we should get a beep somewhere for D3. So D3 is missing, and there was another one as well, wasn't there? Which one was it? Pin 22. So what is wrong with pin 22? Now pin 22, oh no, pin 22 is A9. So we had 3 that weren't connected. We've accounted for chip select, but we've got pin 22, which is E9, and pin 13, which is D3, so we're missing 2 signals. So if we go, how many far, so it's 7 from the back side. So if we measure, where are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this signal, E9, should also appear somewhere on the cartridge connector, and it doesn't. So when the customer fitted this socket, or more likely when he took the other one off, it looks like he's severed the E9 and D3 connections to the back socket, and also thereby to the cartridge connector. So the cartridge has got absolutely no hope of working. It's just going to read, it's going to get garbage data because it's missing D3, which is the 4th bit on the data bus. So it's also missing A9, so it won't even be able to get data from the correct place in the memory map. So that's pretty catastrophic. Now obviously I can't really get very good access to the pins under here. This is going to be where the problem is, on the top side of the board. You can pretty much guarantee it. And the only reason this is working at all is because the connections between the CPU and this socket are fine, and therefore they're fine to the ultimate 1 megabyte itself, but they're lost. They're not going to the cartridge port. So I think we're going to have to take this socket off. I think first thing we'll do here is we will add a little bit of solder to the back of the socket. Precision sockets are not fun to remove, unfortunately, because they're kind of airtight on the top side, if you see what I'm getting at, because they're a fairly flush fit. So the desoldering gun tends to have a hard time with it, so I'm not looking forward to this. So let's wait for that desoldering gun to heat up and see if we can get this off, and then we'll inspect the damage. well, that socket just fell off the board with no additional solder wicking or anything at all, which is absolutely brilliant. So I'm over the moon with that new handset for the ZD915. So anyway, let's have a close look at this socket here. And, well, we can immediately see there's a big problem here. We've got a completely missing area of trace down here. And where does that one lead? Oh, it just happens to go to pin 13, which is D3. And this one here looks like it's damaged as well, but since that's actually VSS, it does, I'll test it to ping it out just in case. So that is this one here, so pin 12. It does have continuity, but it might not have direct continuity between the two, but it may be linked somewhere else. So that one's not quite so critical, but that has been damaged in the conflict, and this one is totally toast. So we're going to have to fix these two traces here, particularly that one, D3. That's why the system isn't working with cartridges, quite simply. And if we fix that, I'm 99% sure everything's going to work again. So it's just, again, it's an object lesson in being careful when you replace sockets or you take stuff off the board, because this obviously happened when the old socket was being taken off. I usually use a screwdriver or something to lift them out like that, so some sort of pointing device perhaps was used and it's actually gouged into the board. There's a couple of other spots as well down here where you can see there's quite a big rut there as well, but that hasn't actually damaged anything. But anyway, that's what the problem is, so that's what we need to fix. So we're going to get some very fine wire and we're going to try and patch that trace. I could patch it on the back side of the board, actually. It might be a better idea, because it's going to be such a tight squeeze to try and get through that space. I don't know. I like to patch things right on the site of the damage. Actually, I don't particularly care for wires going on the back. I could make life a bit easier for myself just by cutting away all that damaged copper and just putting a patch wire on the back. It doesn't really make any difference. It doesn't have to be a work of art, and I'd rather do it the simple way than risk introducing a short on the board when I come to put the replacement socket on it. Okay, so what I've managed to do here, just because I'm a perfectionist, it'll probably be me undoing in this instance, but I found some magnet wire, this stuff here, and it's got ceramic insulation on it, so I scraped away either end of a short length of magnet wire and I've soldered it to the trace. This one is actually okay. It had a kind of a nick in the middle of it, but I just tinned it and it's okay. So I think that one's going to be fine. I'm just going to have to be careful when I put the socket back on not to get too much heat in the way. But anyway, that's going to be fine, so there's no possibility of that shorting out over either those two legs, and that appears to be firm. I'll test it with the meter, and I'll test the other one as well. So pin 13, that's good now, and this one is also good for the reason that it's not actually broken. So fingers crossed. I'm now going to put a new socket on here, and I'm going to be very careful when I install it that I don't get too much solder running around underneath there. Okay, here we go. Fingers crossed. I really don't want to take this off again. I'm going to be very, very sparing with the solder, especially up in this area here. Okay. Hopefully that's done it. Is that wire still there? Yes, it is. Is it shorted out to anything? Have we still got the connection? We have. Is it shorted out to any of these back pins? it's not. Okay, here we go. Let's give it a try. Right. Okay, let's see if that's made any difference. Firstly, we just try. But the first thing we want to see is if the computer still works at all. Have I made it worse, or have I made it better? So let's see if it boots. So it still boots. That's a good sign. Right, so it's pretty much as it was before. Do we get cartridge boot? Oh, we do. There we go, another one fixed. That was the problem all along. So yeah, case in point, when you're going to replace a socket on one of these boards, please, when you've taken the old socket off, get a multimeter, get an eyeglass, magnifying glass, microscope, whatever you need. And even so, this is something even I do, and when I can remove a chip cleanly from the board normally, I always do a visual inspection, and if I'm in any doubt whatsoever, I ping out all the traces just to be sure, because when there's no socket on the board or there's no chip on the board, that's the time to do the repairs. It becomes much more difficult to see what's going on once the socket's gone on the board. So we had 2 damage traces there. One of them was okay-ish. The other one was a clean break, and that had caused a break in the D3 connection to the cartridge port. So I guess what that's meaning is that the operating system, when it looks at, so it knew there was a cartridge there, because Trig 3 was telling it there was a cartridge there, but the operating system checks a flag just below the start of the operating system, so the upper end of the cartridge ROM, and it checks flags there. It checks signature byte that has to be, I think, non-zero, and it's got the cartridge start vectors. Well, they're all going to be wrong, because any information it gets from those 6 bytes, the init vector, the start vector, the flags, that's all going to be wrong. It's going to have bogus data in it. So that's why cartridges weren't working. And I guess in future I'll be even more vigilant when it comes to a board that arrives that somebody else has done some work on, because you just never know. So hopefully, I suppose I'd better test everything else. I'll do some basic tests, SIO tests. I'll test a side 3 cartridge in here, because I think the owner's going to get one at some point. Do all those tests, but it does look now like the machine works properly. So there we go, another fix, and I hope you found it interesting to see the process that led to that fix. Really basic tools like a multimeter are generally 90% of the time, or even more, they're adequate to do all the tests that you need on a board like this. It's only when things get really, really complicated that you need an oscilloscope. I mean, I've had one now for a couple of years, and I've very rarely had occasion to use it. Sometimes it has been essential, but most of the time it isn't. Just a multimeter and your soldering gear, and that's enough. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you again to patrons who are supporting the channel. That is very, very greatly appreciated. And I also appreciate it when people comment on the videos. All that interaction is good, and if you want to share the content, or if you feel like giving it a like, please, that is very much appreciated indeed. That's it, so thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, so bye bye for now.